The heavy, stifling silence of a military housing complex at 2 in the morning is a specific kind of lonely. It is the hour when the rest of the world sleeps. But for a mother, it is when the weight of reality presses hardest against the chest. In the dim glow of a single kitchen bulb, I rocked my 4-month-old daughter, Hazel, listening to her tiny, ragged gasps as she cried from hunger. The sound tore through me, echoing off the sparse, white walls of our modest apartment near the base. I checked my bank account app for the 4th time, hoping for a miracle, but the cold blue screen only confirmed what I already knew: exactly $43 left until the next military paycheck. Inflation had turned basic groceries into luxury items, and my paycheck vanished the exact moment it hit my bank account. My name is Abigail Sterling, but everyone calls me Abby. I am 28 years old, a specialist E4 in the United States Army working as a logistics analyst. If you looked at me in my digital camouflage uniform, you would see a resilient, independent soldier who faces every challenge with a straight spine and a stoic expression. I chose this life of service over the suffocating, gilded cage of my billionaire family, the DuPonts, seeking to prove my own worth and find an authentic purpose far away from country club luncheons. But right now, looking at my daughter's tear-stained face, that fierce pride felt like an expensive luxury I could no longer afford. Adding to the crushing weight was the deafening silence from my husband, Sergeant David Sterling. David is a 29-year-old motor transport operator, a deeply honest, warm-hearted man who married me for who I was, not the family name I carried. Right now, he is deployed on a highly classified, isolated peacekeeping mission in Eastern Europe. Because of strict operational security and severe communication blackouts, I haven't heard his voice in weeks. I am a temporary single mother, fighting a quiet, desperate war against poverty on the home front while my husband serves our country overseas. As Hazel's cries grew weaker, a cold wave of helplessness washed over me. The price of baby formula had skyrocketed past anything my modest military base pay could sustain. For the last 2 years, ever since I enlisted, my parents had made it clear I was entirely on my own, cut off from the millions of dollars my family controlled. I had proudly accepted that reality. Yet, looking at the empty formula tin on the counter, I knew my pride couldn't feed my child. Swallowing the last remnants of my old upper-class dignity, I made a decision that broke my heart, but secured my daughter's next meal. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the government website to apply for WIC assistance. As I filled out the forms for the federal food benefits, a tear slipped down my cheek, blurring the screen. I whispered to the quiet room that a mother's love means doing whatever it takes, because my daughter's survival mattered infinitely more than any elite family reputation. Part 2. The harsh, sterile buzz of the fluorescent lights at the Target superstore, just outside the gates of Fort Liberty, did nothing to warm the chill in my bones. It was midday, and the aisles were bustling with local shoppers, but I felt entirely isolated. I stood in the checkout line, wearing faded digital camouflage uniform, my heavy combat boots feeling like anchors against the linoleum floor. Hazel was strapped securely to my chest, her soft, warm breaths a stark contrast to the cold anxiety tightening in my throat. In my trembling hand, I held 3 crumpled government WIC vouchers. As the line moved forward, I kept my eyes down, desperately wishing I could disappear. When it was my turn, I carefully placed 3 tins of baby formula onto the conveyor belt and handed the vouchers to the cashier, silently praying the transaction would be quick and quiet. Suddenly, the atmosphere shattered. A sharp gasp cut through the ambient noise of the store, followed by a voice that belonged to a world I thought I had left far behind. "Abigail, what on earth is the meaning of this?" I froze, the blood instantly rushing out of my face as I turned slowly. Standing there, flanked by 2 corporate assistants, was my grandmother, Eleanor DuPont. She looked completely out of place in this ordinary suburban store, dressed in a flawless designer suit, a massive diamond ring catching the harsh overhead light. She had been in town for a major charity gala, and by some cruel twist of fate, had decided to stop here. Her eyes shifted from my worn uniform to the baby strapped to my chest. and finally landed on the government food assistance vouchers resting on the counter. The shock on her face rapidly morphed into a mixture of confusion and intense pain. She stepped closer, her commanding posture suddenly trembling as she looked at me. "Abigail, look at me," she whispered, her voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. "Are you trying to punish me? Was 28 years of raising you not enough? I ask you, wasn't $200,000 a month enough for you to live on?" The cashier gasped softly, staring at us in absolute shock, while the entire checkout lane seemed to fall into a dead silence. I stared back at the matriarch of the DuPont estate, a cold wave of horror sinking deep into my chest. A sudden, sharp wave of long-buried grief and anger welled up inside me, breaking through my soldier's discipline. "What are you talking about, Grandma?" I whispered back, my voice shaking so violently I could barely breathe. A heavy tear escaped my eye, tracking down through the dust on my cheek. "I survive entirely on my E4 specialist base pay. David is deployed in a combat zone, and I am doing this alone. I have never received a single cent from you, or anyone else in the family. Bormet told me 2 years ago that you disowned me the day I joined the army, and that you never wanted to hear my name again." Eleanor gasped, her face turning completely pale as the terrible certainty of my words sank in. The fierce, untouchable matriarch looked at my worn boots, then at the WIC voucher, realizing in an instant that the reality she knew was an absolute lie. Part 3. 10 minutes later, the bright, chaotic aisles of Target were replaced by the quiet sanctuary of a leather booth in a small diner down the road. Hazel was fast asleep in her car seat beside me, completely oblivious to the shattering reality descending upon our family. Across the table, Eleanor sat rigid, her perfect posture barely masking the visible tremor in her hands. Without a word, she reached into her bag, pulled out an iPad, and logged into a secure banking portal. She spun the screen around to face me, her finger tapping against the glass. My eyes scanned the financial ledger, and my heart stopped. There it was in black and white, a private discretionary trust fund under my name. Every single month for the past 24 months, a transfer of exactly $200,000 had been authorized and cleared. I stared at the staggering numbers, my mind spinning as I tried to reconcile the reality of my checking account, which held $43, with the $4.8 million that had supposedly been disbursed to me. "I have never seen this account in my life, Grandma," I whispered, the harsh truth finally settling over me like a suffocating blanket. "I don't own a debit card for this. I never received an IRS tax form for these funds, and I have never signed a single transfer authorization. If this money was leaving your estate every month, who was actually taking it?" Eleanor's hands shook as she opened the detailed transaction history and the routing trails. The records loaded, laying bare a calculated, heartless betrayal. The monthly fortune wasn't going to a military credit union. It was being routed directly into a private holding account owned by my parents, Julian and Victoria DuPont. The depth of their deception was staggering. Julian and Victoria had constructed a malicious narrative to exploit our family's pride and my absence. They had told Eleanor that my enlistment was just a stubborn facade, claiming I had regretted my choice within weeks, but was too proud to admit it to her. They told her I was secretly living in a luxury apartment outside the base, chattering through money, and desperately pleading for her financial support through them. To protect my military career and shield me from disciplinary action for using family wealth, they told Eleanor to keep her distance and never contact me directly. They forged short emails, fabricated text messages, and used my isolated deployment reality, alongside David's complete communication blackout, to completely cut me off from Eleanor's life. For 2 years, they painted me as a spoiled, ungrateful dependent to my grandmother, while telling me that she had disowned me entirely. All the while, they forged my signature on bank documents to siphon away a massive fortune, funding their country club lifestyles and laughing at my real struggle to buy formula. I looked at Eleanor, seeing the profound pain in her eyes as she realized we had both been pawns in my parents' cruel game. Part 4. The atmosphere inside the quiet diner booth shifted instantly. transforming from profound grief into a terrifying, lethal stillness. Eleanor did not cry, nor did she waste a single breath throwing a frantic tantrum. Instead, the raw hurt in her sharp, grey eyes rapidly hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. The maternal instinct of a protective grandmother merged with the ruthless authority of a business titan who had ruled the county's financial landscape for decades. She looked at the screen, then looked back at me, seeing my camouflage uniform and the innocent child sleeping beside me. Her own flesh and blood had been left to calculate pennies for survival, while the perpetrators spent a stolen fortune. It was an insult to the family legacy, a desecration of maternal trust, and a direct declaration of war. Slowly, Eleanor slid her fingers across the iPad screen and pressed a speed dial contact marked simply as Preston. When the line connected, she did not bother with pleasantries. Her voice dropped into a low, terrifyingly calm professional register that sent a shiver down my spine. "Preston," she said, her tone cutting like shattered glass. "I am currently sitting in a diner outside Fort Liberty with my daughter, Abby. It turns out she has never received a single dollar from the discretionary trust, not a single cent. Julian and Victoria have been executing systematic identity theft, forging her signatures, and embezzling the funds for the last 24 months to finance their personal vanity." There was a sharp intake of breath audible through the receiver as the family's lead corporate attorney processed the staggering gravity of the revelation. Before the lawyer could even attempt to offer a standard calming response, Eleanor issued a sequence of commands with absolute finality. "Listen to me very carefully, Preston. I want a full, aggressive forensic audit of that entire trust account initiated within the next 10 minutes. Do not delay. Furthermore, I want you to freeze every single personal asset tied to Julian and Victoria's names. Lock their credit lines, paralyze their corporate accounts, and immediately revoke their legal access to every single family estate property. I want them financially incapacitated before they even realize we have uncovered their tracks." She ended the call without waiting for a goodbye, the digital click echoing heavily in the quiet booth. Turning her absolute focus back to me, Eleanor reached across the table and placed her warm, diamond-clad hand firmly over my trembling fingers. The Iron Matriarch's eyes shone with a fierce, protective determination I had never witnessed before. "They thought they could use your sacrifice, your pride, and your husband's deployment to fund their pathetic greed, Abby," she whispered, her voice carrying the immense weight of the DuPont lineage. "They thought they could comfortably leave my granddaughter and my great-grandmother in engineered poverty while they played high society roles. Your days of chattering through pennies and surviving in silence are officially over, specialist. They are about to learn exactly what happens when you steal from a mother and what happens when you cross this family." Part 5. The air inside the mahogany-paneled boardroom at the DuPont corporate headquarters was thick with a tense, suffocating gravity. Julian and Victoria strode into the room, their movements radiating the usual effortless arrogance of the wealthy elite. Victoria was adjusting a designer scarf, while Julian was actively complaining on his phone about their Amex Centurion cards being inexplicably declined at a high-end boutique downtown, calling it a highly embarrassing administrative error. They had expected a routine quarterly family meeting, perhaps a brief lecture on expenditures from the matriarch. However, their expressions instantly shattered, and the smug complaints died in their throats the moment they looked at the head of the conference table. Sitting calmly in the executive high-back chair was not Eleanor, but me. I sat perfectly rigid, dressed in my immaculate, pressed digital camouflage uniform, the specialist rank on my chest catching the light. Flanking me on either side were Eleanor and 3 of the state's most ruthless, high-powered corporate defense attorneys. The sheer contrast between my utilitarian combat boots and the polished grandeur of the room was striking. Victoria's manicured hand flew to her mouth as she stumbled backward, her chest heaving. "What is she doing here?" she sneered, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "And why are our personal accounts frozen, Eleanor? This is an absolute outrage." Grandma Eleanor didn't utter a single word, her silence carrying the heavy, terrifying authority of a judge. She simply gave a curt nod to her lead counsel, Preston Brooks. Preston stepped forward, opening his sleek silver laptop and turning the bright screen directly toward my parents. "These are the immutable results of the forensic accounting investigation," Preston announced, his tone clinical, detached, and icy cold. "Over the last 48 hours, we have fully documented 24 months of systematic grand larceny, wire fraud, and grand-scale embezzlement. We possess the complete digital routing trails showing exactly how you siphoned millions from Abby's trust into your personal offshore shell accounts." Preston tapped a key, bringing up high-resolution scans of bank authorizations. "More importantly, we have the official forensic handwriting analysis, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that you repeatedly forged your daughter's signature on these monthly release forms." Julian's face instantly drained of all color, shifting to a sickly, hollow shade of gray as he stared at the overwhelming mountain of evidence. The elite, untouchable facade they had worn for decades collapsed in a matter of seconds. Confronted with the undeniable proof of their greed, my parents immediately degenerated into panicked cowardice. Victoria turned on Julian, hysterically blaming his bad investments, while Julian desperately stammered that they only did it to keep the family wealth secure, until I came to my senses. They whimpered and shifted in their seats, completely unmasked as pathetic thieves before the very mother whose trust they had so cruelly betrayed. Part 6 faced with the crushing reality of their exposure, Julian and Victoria panicked. Their hands trembled violently as Preston pushed a stack of legal documents across the polished table. Desperate to avoid a public scandal and the immediate arrival of local law enforcement, they eagerly grabbed the pens. With frantic, messy strokes, they signed over the transfer lines, relinquishing their luxury vehicles, their private real estate deeds, and all remaining personal shares in the DuPont family corporations directly to my name. They looked up at Eleanor, breathing heavily, assuming their total financial ruin would suffice as penance, and that they would be permitted to walk out of the room to salvage whatever was left of their pride. However, the illusion of their clean escape vanished in an instant. Before they could even gather their designer belongings, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. The casual hum of the corporate office was replaced by the firm, disciplined footsteps of 4 federal law enforcement officials. Stepping into the room were 2 special agents from the FBI, accompanied by 2 investigators from the Army Criminal Investigation Division, known as CAD. Julian lunged forward, his voice rising in high-pitched panic as he gestured to the signed papers. "We signed the transfers, Eleanor. We gave everything back. Tell them to leave. This is a private family dispute." I stood up slowly from the head of the table, my posture rigid and my eyes reflecting the quiet, steely discipline of a United States soldier. I looked down at the 2 people who had abandoned me to engineered poverty while my husband was risking his life in a combat zone. "This stopped being a private family dispute the moment you crossed into federal jurisdiction," I said, my voice completely calm and devoid of anger, which made it all the more chilling. "You didn't just steal money from a trust fund, you purposefully intercepted the identity, forged the legal signatures, and weaponized the financial life of an active duty service member whose spouse is deployed overseas." Preston stepped in, his voice sealing their fate. Under United States federal law, executing identity theft and financial fraud against an active duty service member during a time of national deployment elevates this to a major federal felony, specifically federal military identity theft. The documentation you just signed to return the stolen millions only serves as a gesture of restitution. It does not erase the criminal charges or halt a federal grand jury indictment. The FBI agents stepped forward, pulling steel handcuffs from their belts. Victoria shrieked, dropping her designer handbag as the cold metal links locked around her manicured wrists, while Julian wept openly, his knees buckling as he was turned toward the door. They were led out of the DuPont building in full view of the corporate staff, utterly ruined, publicly humiliated, and facing years in a federal penitentiary. Part 7. The echo of the slamming boardroom doors finally faded, leaving behind a profound, cleansing silence. For the first time in 2 years, the heavy cloak of isolation and engineered deceit was lifted from my shoulders. The stolen millions, meticulously reclaimed through the swift actions of Eleanor and Preston, were immediately transferred into a secure, ironclad protection trust. This account was placed under the sole custody of myself and my daughter, Hazel, ensuring that no one could ever weaponize my family's wealth against me again. Yet, as I looked at the vast balance on my phone, my first instinct was not to celebrate or indulge in the luxury I had once known. I looked down at my uniform, feeling the deep responsibility of the combat boots I still wore. The very next morning, accompanied by Preston, I walked straight into the local Social Security and Public Assistance Office, the same government building where I had once stood with a heavy heart. I sat across from the caseworker and requested a full calculation of every single dollar of WIC assistance I had received over the past months. I pulled out a certified check and repaid the state government in full, down to the very last cent. The caseworker stared at me in absolute shock, but I simply offered a warm, peaceful smile. I told her that those vouchers had saved my daughter's life when I was truly desperate, but now that justice had restored my path, I wanted that public money to return to the system to aid the next young mother who had nowhere else to turn. It was my first step toward true healing, converting a moment of past shame into an act of profound human dignity. The true healing, however, arrived 3 weeks later under the warm, bright afternoon sun at the Fort Liberty arrival terminal. The restrictive communication blackouts had finally lifted, and the deployment cycle was over. Standing beside Grandma Eleanor, who held Hazel tightly in her arms, my eyes scanned the sea of returning soldiers stepping off the transport buses. Then I saw him. David walked out, his uniform covered in tactical dust, his face tired but his eyes searching the crowd with absolute desperation. When his gaze locked onto mine, he dropped his heavy rucksack to the pavement and ran toward me. I threw my arms around his neck, burying my face into his shoulder as the familiar scent of worn canvas and military starch enveloped me. We held each other tightly, the long months of lonely midnight silence and dangerous battlefields completely evaporating in the warmth of our embrace. David pulled back, his eyes watering as he looked from me to Eleanor, and then down to the beautiful daughter he was holding for the first time in nearly a year. Eleanor stepped forward, her sharp eyes glistening with soft tears as she welcomed David into the family, acknowledging the true worth of the honorable man I had chosen. In that beautiful moment of connection, surrounded by the joyous chaos of military families reuniting, I knew the fractures of our past were fully mended, and our real journey was just beginning. Part 8. The recovered millions were no longer a symbol of elite isolation or hollow privilege. Instead, they became the foundation for a legacy built on genuine empathy and shared sacrifice. With David safely home and the shadow of my parents' deception completely erased, our family sat down with Eleanor to plan a meaningful future. I chose to transition out of active service, completing my time as an E4 specialist with a clean record and a deeply grounded sense of purpose. We used a massive portion of the multi-million-dollar assets recovered from Julian and Victoria to establish the Sterling and DuPont Foundation. Our mission was born directly from the dark, quiet midnight hours I had spent in that small apartment, listening to my daughter cry while calculating pennies for survival. The foundation was built to ensure that no military family facing an unexpected deployment or financial hardship would ever have to swallow their dignity in isolation. We established emergency grants, distributed high-quality baby formula, and provided immediate child care resources to young service members across the United States whose spouses were deployed overseas. Eleanor took an active role as an advisor, proud to see the DuPont wealth finally serving an authentic human cause. Whenever a young mother walked into our foundation offices, looking worn out and carrying the silent weight of the home front alone, I didn't see a stranger, I saw myself. The ultimate lesson of my journey wasn't about the millions of dollars we won back, but the resilience we discovered within ourselves. Famjia and true independence are not bought with a family trust fund. They are forged through trials, sustained by love, and validated by the simple act of lifting others up. Where are you listening to Abby's inspiring story from? Please drop your city, state, or military base in the comments below to let us know. Would you like to see a follow-up video exploring Abby and David's journey as they expand the foundation, or are you curious about the legal fate of Julian and Victoria in federal prison? Comment the name of the character you want to follow next. If this deeply human story of justice and healing touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our upcoming drama stories.